Hi, I'm Sue Stockdale, and welcome to episode 137 of the Access to Inspiration podcast. Today I'm joined by Agnese Spona, a learning design innovator whose passion for education was ignited by her upbringing in a family of educators. In our conversation, Agnese shares how she has reimagined the way we approach learning. And that's from tailored educational experiences to testing new prototypes that push the boundaries of traditional education. I'm curious to explore with her the role of AI in creating personalised learning journeys and why inspiring curiosity is more critical than ever. So whether you're an educator, a learner, or simply curious about the future of education, this episode will bring fresh insights and inspiration. And as always, you can follow along with the transcription of this episode on our website, accesstoinspiration.org. Welcome to the podcast, Agnese. It's great to speak to you today.
Hello, Sue. Thank you for having me.
Today, we're going to be thinking about learning design. So maybe the good place to start is what sparked your initial interest in the area of learning design?
Yes, I'll give a bit of context of my life that I think nicely leans into my current focus. So my whole family are educators. Because I was a really big rebel in my nature, I decided, no, I'm not going to go in this direction. I'm not going to be a teacher or anything like that. So I went a big detour, which started off with marketing and then moved into digital product management in the large corporates for 10 years. And one thing that was coming there a lot was what it is in for user. So either it's a digital product or it is, let's say, someone who consumes any marketing content. So you always try to shape the messaging and figure out how do you convince someone either to use your product or buy something from you. And then I established my own company together with my business partner, and he was coming from customer experience background. And we were thinking like, what would make sense for us? And by then I already have been working in a couple of unis as a thesis and research supervisor because as probably my blood was still calling me. So I already started to step with one leg in the education sector. And then we were like thinking, okay, my digital product management background and his customer experience background, let's build a learning business that is innovative and really think about the learner, because he was coming from customer perspective and I was coming from product perspective. And how does that look in environment of learning?
Was there an example you could give us that would help the listener to picture it in their mind? Who would be the customer that would have come to you and said, we want your help with X?
Yes. So I will take as example a community that wanted to build or provide for their members more content and more value as a community. So they wanted to provide learning experiences and learning trajectories where they can obtain certain skills. So the first step would be really look and do the research. First of all, to understand if they want that, because you might assume that, okay, yes, of course, community members, this is such a rich content, right? This will make our community be a better place and more appealing to their members. However, first, you still need to challenge that if that actually is the case. So you start the discovery process. So you start to understand what the members actually want, how much time do they have, what are their ways of learning. If, for example, they identify, yes, learning would be one of the things that I would really appreciate, and then you start to deepen their knowledge on how they learn, what they learn, how realistic is that they actually going to take their online course or whatever course that you have potentially in mind. Do they prefer classroom setups? Do they perform live online setups or on-demand online setups? All these questions. So as much as possible, you try to discover. And then the first thing in learning design is defining their learning objectives. So what you gonna learn? So what is that outcome that you're trying to achieve with this program? And what is the promise? So first, you try to define that. The next step would be really figuring out how to do it. And it's really working together with your audience, working together with your users or learners. What is their preferences, right? And you figure out you have hundreds of ways and you start to cluster the data and see where the synergies are. And based on that, you make a decision. Okay, we're going to do it in this way. Then you start to ideate on what exactly going to go in, what kind of content it's going to be, what methodologies. And then you build a prototype. Okay, this is how that might look like. Based on all that research and input that you gain, you build the program and you start to test the prototype. And that's very important. So you have your test groups, someone that you trust will give you extensive feedback So you can iterate and iterate and iterate. So that's traditionally is learning design. So that this process of how you figure out what the learning looks like. And I want to challenge that, let's say, a more traditional view on looking not only on what that exact experience is while you learn, but also look at where the learner's journey actually starts and where it ends. And one of the things that's really hard in education is evaluation of effectiveness of that education. Basically checking if the learning objective that you set out in the beginning, actually you have achieved. And that's the hardest part. It's doable and there are plenty of ways how to do it cleverly. And however, you also might have to give it time. So, for example, we sometimes had also in our business situations where people after a couple of years send us like a big feedback letter on, okay, actually, now after 2 years when I was been practicing, I finally got the process in and that actually worked. And thanks for advocating for it. That's really, of course, rewarding. But also to assume that learner's journey starts only in a point where they enter already the classroom, it's, in my view, short-minded because you also mentioned, right, inspiration and motivation of learning. That's where it starts, right? How do you inspire people? How do you actually motivate people to recognize that they want to learn? Or how do you identify that gap? And how do you do it in a gentle and kind manner? Because it's a sensitive topic, always, to start that learning journey. And I think that's where service design comes in as a discipline to think about it a bit broader than only that kind of product delivery space where the learning happens in the middle.
So the traditional learning experience might be, let's just take, for example, a leadership course. A company might say, we want to have a course that will help our leaders develop better leadership skills. I would have gone away and designed it. I would pilot it. If it was successful, perhaps by very simple feedback at the end of a course, then we can go ahead and deliver that course. And then at the end, we would have some way of measuring whether the leaders in the organisation were more effective as leaders, whether it was immediately or 6 or 9 months or 12 months down the line. Am I summarising correctly what might have been a traditional approach to learning design?
Yes. And not only for, let's say, I think a leadership course. In this case, you still mentioned quite consideration, at least some input about who your learner is, right? So because you already say leadership course, so it's a leader, so it's a certain group of people you already have a little bit insight. So in your design, you would consider that. But if you imagine a bit more traditional spaces or universities or even schools where learners are put all in one big bracket and only, let's say, the brain development is considered. And that's it, right? So then imagine the effectiveness of that design, how that would be impacted. For example, to teach the curriculum to so many people that are maybe not fitting that very generic profile.
So with the work that you and your business partner were doing, you were making it far more customized to individual learners and really ensuring that the experience provided was meeting their specific needs in the way that they like to learn.
Yes. In the ideal world, of course, you're still missing the mark sometimes, right? So because you still can't develop everything for every individual. There are people with clashing agendas or clashing interests or being told to be learning by their manager and they don't feel like it. And still you need to navigate that and make it engaging. And then you go into the kind of methodology, indeed, how you get there. But yes, that's the ultimate goal, to make sure that you consider really the learner in your design and that you spend time in getting to know your learner.
So this is really fascinating what you're saying, Agnes. And I can see that, of course, the way that the workplace is evolving can have quite a major impact on the learning experience into the future for people and individuals. I'd like to just come back to your own interest and what sparked your interest in this. You said that you came from a family of educators and that perhaps you were trying to get away from that in some way, shape, or form. When you were in that environment with your family, I guess, what do you think were the things that you absorbed about education and learning that had an impact on you?
It's an interesting question because I haven't thought too much about, let's say, the turning points, but I know for sure that I was quite angry while I was studying and while also I had dinner conversations with some of my family members. Like, let's say what I got upset about is that I am not good with numbers or referring facts. And all my life, till my master's degree, which was different, I have been asked in exams to refer back to when the theory has been defined or by who and what year, but no one asked the understanding of the theory often. In high school, I was in a very high demanding high school, but it all was about the volumes. So the more volume you can get through, the more facts, the more, math you can get through, the better student you were. And I was quite upset about it. And also like how stereotypical education could be. Like back in the day, and it's still happening in Latvia, where I'm originally from, in high school, girls and boys are split. There's like this kind of housekeeping class as part of your mandatory curriculum. And girls are learning how to sew clothes and knit socks and bake pancakes. And boys are learning to put the shelf on the wall. And it's only now starting to have a bit of a mix, and that the parents can choose to which skills you're sending your kids independently from their gender. And I always had like a bit like, how can it be that this all happens like this? And or for example, some of my family members are quite esteemed professors, and they, for example, don't read English. So they would read German and Russian and Latvian, which is, of course, a huge volume of study that you can inform your own research. However, I do believe that English has become academic language of the world. You have to be able to read and write in academic English. And if you're not reading that, I feel like, are you really actually able to progress the research in your area? So for me, this kind of is like, there's something missing. There's something really missing. And what I also felt like in my own context, I'm not a fast reader. I read slow but intense. I'm very good at audio. I'm good in learning while doing. I'm a practical person. But I had such a little chance to be recognized for these skills. And all my life, I had been pushed in the situations where I had to perform in a different way. And then I could always felt not excellent or not good enough. And therefore, I felt that you lose. That's why I think also my rebellism came out of like that. I was like, the system and the way how education is set up is not interested in me and in my talents. So I better go somewhere else and do something else. And only over time and over years, then I realized that, well, it's not that they're not interested in me. They're not interested in so many people, you know? And that's a challenge currently, I think, what education faces, or learning what it faces. And the whole boom of e-learning and wanting to scale, and there's a lot of positive things, for example, that the education or information or knowledge becomes accessible to so many more people. However, if people learn and if people succeed in these environments, are they actually achieving those learning objectives or not? That's a design problem. So that's a learning design, because it's assumption just because of the access that the people will learn. So the access should be defined as a first problem. And then they're only thinking like, okay, we just have all this content and we'll just make it accessible through e-platforms or e-learn platforms. And then it will be all solved. But obviously not, because that's not how people learn. That's also for me very inspiring, because there's so much to learn. There's so much knowledge out there, but we somehow haven't yet figured out how to actually make it work for most people, or how to make it even for some of the minority groups. So that's very, very inspirational for me.
And if you're enjoying this episode, I also recommend that you listen to episode 124, where Neil Whitewick described how we can transform lives by using nature as a classroom. And remember, we have over 130 episodes, ranging from business and sports to the arts and social change. Just hop on over to accesstoinspiration.org to discover them all. Now back to our guest. I'm hearing that passion that you have born out your own experience of the platforms, the methods for learning not being suited to you, and wanting to find a way that it will be suited to more people more of the time. COVID obviously played a major role in changing learning, because we did all go online during that time. If I now fast forward into the world of AI, which again is dramatically changing the learning environment, does that suit the type of work that you do then better, because AI can be more individualized?
Definitely. So if we talk about this kind of content piece, right? So then the information and knowledge piece, right? That is part of every learning. There will be always something that you need to theoretize, or there has to be theoretical part of it. And to make it fit more individualistic needs, it's fantastic. So for example, so if you're talking about well-being at the workplace and you want to teach how to build more resilient workforce, you still need to look on who is learning that. So your leadership will need to have a different view on it, right? So they need to have a bit more holistic view, even though the theory of what it is and how it's the same, but they don't need nitty-gritty detail. Then you go into management, they will need to figure out how to implement and activate that in their teams. And then the people, let's say workforce or employees, they will need to figure out how to make sure that they actually practice certain things. It's the same content, but it has to be in very different chunks and very different ways how it is presented to specific groups. And AI can do it in a second. So you don't need to anymore write that. Of course, you need to have your own common sense in that, but you can chunk out the pieces of content quite easily for individuals. The challenge starts in learning, especially, is like the how. So how that information is brought to these people. Because AI currently, of course, offers a limited options for that. And there, I do believe the educators and learning designers or content experts, they can really add that value by connecting with their learners, building conversations and discussions and debates, and also creating that applied environment where you need to apply it. Because I do believe that by applying and practicing, you actually learn really the best, especially if you have a bit of theory that you can immediately apply. That will be kind of winning method, and AI is not capable of doing that part. So it's very good in chunking out the content pieces, building individual journeys for learners, but you still need to add that personal touch, in my view, to make sure the learning is really effective.
So if you were going back to learn again, Agnes, as a young person, knowing what you know now about how learning is constructed and how it can be valuable for more people, how would you do it differently now? Rather than having sewing for girls and putting up shelves for boys, what would the learning journey look like given all the knowledge and technology we have today?
To make it very concise, for me, that is all about learners-led content. So that you as a learner, you can define what you learn. Of course, I don't talk about 5-year-olds who learn to read or do math, but I'm talking about even in high school where you can pursue your interests. But there is one catch. You need to be able to define that. You need to be able as a young person to figure out what is your interest and what you want to learn, what kind of person you want to be. And you need to believe that you can do it. And that's a big catch in education. And that's education currently is quite missing in any context, whatever. So that people often are not capable of defining that. Or they lack curiosity or courage to explore different things. Even if they maybe don't know if they are interested in that. But they are not putting themselves out there to learn that. So that is prerequisite in order to then lead your own learning. I just had a discussion today with someone, very senior educational professional. She works in business of learning. So they also have a huge learning business, and they're looking at teaching thousands of people a certain skill. She was like really sharing her frustration that students, she has her own 3 kids that move into university level. The young people cannot choose what their degree looks like. So for example, if you want to look at learning designer as a profession, so you would want to learn about AI, you want to learn about project management, you want to learn about instructional design techniques, you want to learn about how human brain works, about psychology, all these things, but that degree doesn't exist. However, all these topics are broadly covered in almost any, let's say, state university, but you are not capable of choosing that. And then we were looking at, literally, while we were conversing, we were looking at various countries, so UK, Germany, France, US, how actually the universities have been trying to address that. So in US, you have majors and minors. So in theory, through minor, you can discover that you are actually interested in something else. In France, you have to do everything. It's mandatory. You don't have any option. This is what you learn. That's it. In Netherlands, for example, if you go in applied sciences university, first year, you're taking this subject, like a typical subjects like finance and law and project management and all those things. So you earn your first year degree, which then you can transfer to any applied sciences university in the country, because they have built it in a way that, yes, you probably don't know when you are 19 what you want to study, so you can switch it around. In Latvia, for example, we have these kind of A, B, C types of subjects. So A, you have to do mandatory. B, there's a more precise information, but let's say from 6, you have to choose 4. And then C, you can choose whatever course. However, there is still this hierarchy of topics. So you still have these kind of mandatory things that you have to learn, and those are the most important. The rest is like, oh, nice to haves. But at the end of the day, maybe by discovering something different on the side, you actually discover, oh, actually, I want to do that in full time. And I think it's more often than less often that that happens. And that young people, by following their interest and curiosity, can really benefit and finishing their programs and being more enthusiastic of entering the job force.
So across the world, there are different ways that learning is being designed. You've mentioned curiosity more than once in our conversation so far. And I'm just wondering whether one of the first things that young people, or even grown-ups for that matter, should be encouraged to learn about is how to develop their curiosity, such that then that will drive them into learning more widely in the future.
Definitely. And again, I will share a specific example from US high school. It's a private high school, also comes from my network, from someone who worked in these type of schools. They had this very enthusiastic teacher, and he believed in interest education, and he really believed in this kind of learners-led selection of the topics that they want to explore and actually give them opportunity to explore it in a proper manner, not just going on Wikipedia or watching YouTube video. So what happened in that school? So you could identify whatever interest, or for example, you want to learn more about dinosaurs. You identify that interest and say, okay, I want to learn about dinosaurs. And if you got 2 more people who also want to learn about dinosaurs, so 3 people cap, which is super low in my view. So it's fantastic. So the school would have a budget allocated for that. So they would actually hire someone in to teach these 3 kids properly about dinosaurs, about the history, about everything, the whole shebang. And that I find it really, really fascinating. And then kids, through that, of course, if they could just say, okay, I want to learn about this, and you actually have been given chance to learn that, how else even to spark your curiosity? So by being exposed, by learning from someone who is incredibly enthusiastic about the topic and has dedicated their life for that topic, that's really inspirational. On the other hand, it can be also, okay, yeah, there's a lot of digging and a lot of museum and a lot of academia. It's actually not maybe right for me because it's all about history. I want to be more about future stuff, So you can, through that as well, already build some other layers of curiosity, like, okay, what other topics you might be interested in? And that's a beautiful example on how this type of innovation happens or how this is enabled. However, it's not simple because it's very hard to scale.
And scaling seems like it's the challenge. The more we scale, the more we generalize rather than individualize.
Yes. So for example, let's take the same enthusiastic teacher as an example. So if he or she wants to go and say, okay, I want to deploy this program in 10 schools in my region. So they have to hit, let's say, a couple of bureaucratic walls on the way to make that bigger impact, right? Because obviously kids super happy, very enthusiastic, super engaged, better school ratings. There's no question about the benefit or outcome of this, if it's working or not. However, it requires budget, it requires some shuffling, it requires some work, and it requires approval of certain bureaucratic layers. If you are really enthusiastic and amazingly, yes, let's do it, you might hit the couple, right? So you might get through a couple of these walls, but then there will be next one. And it all in one point, usually, what is observed here as well, like I think in any country, that people get tired. You want to more work with actual kids. You want to actually see their eyes sparkle and get that gratification from actually doing the program rather than sitting in endless meetings and trying to deal with the system who doesn't want to change. And that's the overall consensus or sentiment around this, right? So yes, you can do great programs, then you deal with only your headmaster or whatever. And if you get the support, fantastic. But then if you want to scale, that's really difficult. And then, yes, the problem that you're mentioning, then there will be not, in public school, there won't be 3 people cap. There will be probably 15. to get the program in or to get a specific teacher in to come in. So it will be all altered based on the context, based on the budgets, based on whatever things. And indeed, it immediately becomes larger scale. So some kids will never get their program through because they will never get 15 people interested in their topic.
As I listen to you, Agnes, I'm sensing your expression of frustration in that the system sometimes can limit the opportunities for the individualized learning experience. And yet, from an organizational context, sometimes having those bureaucratic levels serves a different purpose in an organization. They may not see it as bureaucracy, they may see it as a system that provides consistency and things to be scaled or managed more efficiently. So we suddenly encounter other needs within an organisation or a business that can then be in conflict with that opportunity to individualise learning. I would like to take the conversation back to you, Agnes, and back to the topic of curiosity and learning, and ask you, what are you curious about learning currently? Where is your interest taking you?
Interesting question. I follow the thread of tech, so I love technology and everything around it. And I am absolutely not against using technology in enabling education or enabling new methods and learning, especially if we're looking at groups that didn't have any access to information, knowledge, and learning now that have. And I'm not talking only about, let's say, more remote parts of the world where you literally can't have school across the corner. But I'm talking about people who have any type of either disability or preferred learning styles, and all that suddenly is catered and so many more people can learn. So I love that whole space. And of course, AI on top of it and looking at what the future looks like from learning perspective. It's very, very inspirational and interesting, and I love to think about it. I also love organizational psychology. And I find psychology in general is very exciting and I think really essential or plays a huge part in learning. But organizational psychology, especially because it's more about the groups and how groups work together to achieve certain goal. And every business is supposed to be achieving a certain goal or generating value, and how value perception is changing over time now, and the ways how people work together to achieve that value also are changing. So that's for me very fascinating, and observing that and reading about it. So yeah, I think those are like the key areas where I'm focusing my interest on from professional perspective.
So if you were applying the principles that you've been sharing with us today about good learning design and about following what the customer wants, how would you be designing an experience for yourself that would enable you to maximize and enhance that curiosity and interest in those areas that you just talked to us about?
It's interesting how you frame the question, because it's about what customer wants. Because, of course, if you will ask the learner what they want and how they want to learn, there's not always that they will know, or they are not professionals in this space. So there's always something in between the lines that you need to read. I want to also emphasize that any responsible designer, either a learning designer, service designer, experience designer, doesn't matter, have to consider that we are not sitting in isolated context. So it would include understanding on how this part that you're learning sits within a bigger system. So what role it plays and where it can go wrong, and to have a very kind of consciousness of whatever you're learning, that you can be also doing harm, either to environment or to other people or to anything really. Then for me, that would be always applied. I would always want to learn and then apply, and that you feel useful and validated in the way how you do things. Because I think that's very important, because, for example, a lot of people are reskilling in their midlife, right? So they are doing things for the first time in their life. So that validation, that understanding, giving space for mistakes and failure, that's very, very important. I think how I would want to be able to learn.
So Agnes, what you've been outlining to me as I've been hearing it is a bit of a process or a system that perhaps the listener can be reflecting on for themselves. One, how do we inspire curiosity for people to want to learn and the belief that they can follow that journey for themselves? Then for them to understand and have an awareness of how does that desire sit within a bigger system? Where might it be harmful? Where might it be helpful? So they're not just looking individualized at their own needs. They're looking more broadly. Then some way of applying that learning, application of that learning, once they've learned about dinosaurs or how to create a chocolate or anything else for that matter. Some way of getting feedback so they know that what they are learning and understanding is useful, and it validates them, that they are useful in what they're learning. And then lastly, how do we give space for making mistakes?
Yes, it's a wonderful summary. Thank you, Sue. I couldn't say it better.
Because it seems to me that some of the things that we've been talking about and exploring today together, Agnes, are going to be really very important as AI changes the way that organisations operate, which leaves us to think about what is the role of the human being in those environments. No longer are people going to be doing traditional jobs. We know that the world is changing so fast. How then do you see what we've been talking about today about learning and designing learning for people? How will we design learning for workers in the future whose work in the past may now have been taken over by AI?
I think the key here would be to have that mindset that it's nothing wrong if AI can do your Excel spreadsheet, that you don't have to anymore do it yourself. It's fine. It's fantastic, actually. You don't have to do it anymore. Okay, the question is what you're going to do then with that Excel spreadsheet. What you need to be able to do, that you take the outcome of an Excel spreadsheet, you can see if it's correct, or let's say if it leads to the results, or you can understand the result, what it says, and you can socialize this result and drive a right change in organization to apply that result and make the right next decisions. If you very simplify that, then there's plenty of this type of tasks where we spend so many hours of our workday that we don't need to. However, we spend really little amount of time socializing with people, explaining what analysis you have, why it's important, how we can change things and see and have that vision and, again, curiosity on what can we do better, how we can apply this insight into making something new or bring some other value, or if we're getting insight about something, let's say, not so positive. Okay, how can we address that? How can we change, for example, our footprint as an organization to the environment? How we actually can do it. That these are very clear examples. And there's so many people who do the analysis now as their primary job and then send an email and think that everyone needs to read that email and rely on that fact that you have sent the email instead of going to your colleague next door to talk about it. That is scary. And we need to get better on being humans and less good at doing our spreadsheets, because that will be obsolete.
So with the experience and knowledge that you have about how we learn, how we can encourage other people to learn, how are we going to get better at being human? What might inspire, given this is the Access to Inspiration podcast, what might we do to inspire people to get better at being humans, as we've been talking about today?
It's a $1 million question, eh?
I never said it would be easy coming on this podcast.
For me, probably the key, what I have discovered lately in the last couple of years only of my life, is the power of listening, the power of actually hearing the other human being and listening empathetically. And when you learn, I know that also when we were teaching various topics, it doesn't really matter what. A lot of people want to be skeptical towards learning. So they feel like, oh, but I already know this. Oh, you don't have enough credentials. They will always find a reason why they want to bail out or why they don't want to listen to you or why they don't want to do the work. And that can be various reasons for that. But one of the things that if we would get a bit better in listening, a bit better on hearing what other people are saying, trying to do that empathetically, meaning that doesn't mean that you have to accept every single person in this world, but you can at least accept the fact that they just are who they are. I think that already would be a huge leap. And it can be applied in any context. It can be applied in school environment. It can be applied in an organizational environment. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I think it brings us back full circle to the beginning of our conversation. Sounds to me like if when you'd been at school, if somebody had listened and understood that the way you learned was not the way the system was teaching you to learn, that would have been enough for you to have been recognised and heard at that point. And what I'm hearing you say here is that listening and understanding does not necessarily mean we agree with the person, but we hear them and we understand that they are coming into a conversation with a point of view. And that is an important part of us being human in the future, in those discussions with those Excel spreadsheets that AI have created for us.
Exactly.
So if you were looking into the future, even further than we have been, Agnes, and thinking about what you believe your contribution, what your legacy you would hope would be, I wonder if you've given any thought to that.
I was just talking to my husband the other day that there was a part in my life or time in my life where I really wanted to have that recognition or audience or like visibility. There's some sort of visibility missing, what I felt. And what I now feel and what I really hope to do, that if I have impacted even one person or inspired one person to do better or apply their knowledge and learn more and be curious, I'm already happy. And I know that I have done that already. So there's not only one person, there are more of them. However, I am really happy in working with a single classroom and getting them excited about whatever topic. But I also equally excited about talking with policymakers and thinking how we can rethink, for example, the whole evaluation process of students, how that they don't feel belittled through that and that they actually are encouraged to reach the learning objective rather than score a good mark.
Well, I'm certain that through our conversation today that the listener will have gained some new insight, and I'm sure you will have sparked the curiosity in at least one of our listeners to discover more about this subject and consider what is going to be the role of the human being in the world of work as we move forwards. Thank you so much, Agnes. If people want to find out more about you and where you might hang out on social media, how might they do that?
Every day I'm on LinkedIn. So by my Agnese Spona on LinkedIn, you can always find me and contact me. I also have a Doodle Instagram account where I observe life and things around me and I make little doodles, and that is on Instagram as Ness Thinks. And of course I have a website as well, which is think-ness.com. But yeah, I think the easiest way is LinkedIn or Instagram.
Well, we'll make sure we put links to those on the show notes so people can find you easily from there. Thank you again for your time today and helping me to learn about learning.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, thanks to Agnes for piquing our curiosity about the way that learning is evolving through the use of AI. Finally, I have one small ask of you. Please share this episode with just one other person that you think would appreciate listening to it. That way, your support helps us to reach new people and to continue changing the world, one inspirational story at a time. Next week, I'll be back speaking to another inspiring guest, so I hope you can join us then.